So we left off last week on agency law. What is agency law? So an agent is basically anyone who represents someone else within a business environment. So what exactly this means is that an agent is someone you hire to speak for you and to help you gain the most profits. And there are many reasons why someone would want to hire an agent. So one of the reasons why someone would want to hire an agent would be if they were extremely busy, or they had low financial knowledge, or they did not know much about finance, so they don't trust themselves to be able to handle all the financial dealings that they have appropriately. So then what they would do is they would hire someone else who was extremely good at business and finance to help them do their things for them. And there are three ways that an agent can gain authority to represent a person. The first type of authority is expressed authority. So as the name goes to suggest, expressed authority is basically when an agent basically gets permission through the person. So if the person directly told the agent, well, you are now my agent and you have the authority to work for me now. And this is usually through a contract. When they hire the agent, they have to sign a contract. So they're expressing their will for the agent to represent them. The second type of relationship is implied relationship. So an implied relationship, there are not many examples of this because this is not the most common type of way of giving the authority to the agent, but it's basically when any person with common sense would be able to tell that this person has already been selected as the agent. And the last type of authority is really similar. It's apparent authority. So it's when the agent is already acting as this representative of the person, and the person does not have a problem with that. So you're defaulting that the agent is able to work for you appropriately, and that's a legal relationship. And so one question that many ask is that basically a, a lot of people ask that about things like, well, if I hired an agent to do my work for me, right, then would that person still be liable for the damage that they caused in case if they did something that was criminal, right? Would they still be liable for what they did? The answer is yes. Yes, they will be liable, but you, the person who hired the agent, will also be liable. So right now, a new vocabulary is principal. So principal is the person who the agent is working for, who the agent is representing. So if the agent does something that happens to be criminal, right, then the principal would still be responsible. So if you hired someone who broke a law, then you would still be responsible. So you would still, okay, so maybe you wouldn't necessarily go to jail because you didn't commit the crime yourself, but you would still face some punishments for hiring such a person. And now the last idea in our chapter of laws is commercial law. So commercial law is just this broad umbrella term about transactions. So it's any type of law that regulates transactions. The main premise of this is centered around the Uniform Standard Code. So the Uniform Standard Code is basically this law that regulates business transactions. It's basically about how it's legal and not legal to do business, and what type of business doing are legal and are legitimate as stated by the law. And one major thing that this standard code guarantees is a warranty. So a warranty is basically a promise about a product, and I'm pretty sure you've all seen warranties before. It's just that you didn't know the proper term for them was warranty. And there are two types of warranties. So the first one is express warranty. So express warranty is basically any type of warranty in which the product explicitly states that there is a warranty. So let's say if you walked into a store to buy a bicycle, right? And the bicycle seller gave you a warranty of, let's say, 2 years. Well, that's actually a pretty good warranty because bicycles tend to break, right? But anyways, so they gave you this warranty of 2 years. If they specifically said that the bicycle will not break less than 2 years, then that would be an express warranty because they're just telling you that the bicycle won't break. They're just giving you the promise explicitly. And then there's a second type of warranty called implied warranty. So a consumer doesn't actually need to be protected by a warranty for them to be protected because the manufacturer can actually give a warranty without giving a warranty according to the standard code. So what this means is that a product has to be reasonably safe and it has to be reasonably durable in order to be considered a good product. So all products come with a warranty of some kind actually. So let's say if you bought an iPhone, right? Then a person with common sense would be assuming that the iPhone is not gonna shatter as soon as you picked it up, right? So this right here is implied warranty because even though there's nothing on the label of the phone that says that, oh, this phone will not break if you touched it, but they're still held liable to that standard, which isn't even a really high standard because it's a reasonable assumption that phones will not break if you touch them. So now here's just a question, and you can type your answers in the chat if you would like to. What is an example of something that would have a warranty? There isn't really a correct answer to this, so don't worry. It's an open-ended question, really. So an example of a warranty, just to provide an example, a warranty is basically anytime the economics definition of a warranty is anytime a consumer, manufacturer, I mean, promises something about a product. But in the real life, there's really only one type of common warranty that you see, and it's by far the most common type. It's when they promise you that some product will not break. So, for example, if they say something along the lines, and I'm pretty sure you've all heard this. So, this product right here will not break in 3 years, and if it broke within 3 years, then you can get your full refund of the product. Right, so this would be on warranty because they're promising you that the product is up to a certain level of quality and will not break. Right, so this is a warranty. And now there's bankruptcy law. So bankruptcy law, as the name would suggest, it's basically the set of regulations that concern bankruptcies. So it's the set of rules on how you can become bankrupt and what type of becoming bankrupt is actually recognized by the courts. So what is bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is basically a financial state in which you don't have to pay debts. So the only reason why someone would fall into bankruptcy technically is that they had too much debts. So they had so much debt that there's no way, like even if they sell every single one of their assets, they still will not be able to pay back their debts. Then under these conditions, there's really no point in pursuing the person for the debts, right? Because they couldn't pay them back anyways. So that's the reason why we have the bankruptcy law that says that in this condition, you could become a bankrupt and you could just don't have to pay your debts anymore. So a practical example, let's say if you and I were doing a business, right? And I borrowed tons and tons of money from you. then in this case, right, I would be in debt because I borrowed so much money from you. But let's say if my total asset right now, including my house, my car, how, how much I have in the bank account, right? The total asset only adds up to $1,000, but my debt was worth $50,000. So if all of my assets added together only made $1,000, but I owed $50,000 in debts, then there's no way that I would be able to pay back the debt, right? It doesn't matter if the bank put me in jail, liquidated all my assets, right? Then there's simply no way. So in this case, I could declare bankruptcy if I met the conditions specified by bankruptcy law. Then if I were to become successfully bankrupt through the court and through the bank, then I wouldn't have to pay my $50,000 worth debt. This type of bankruptcy is actually increasing because I'm not sure if you can tell, but this is actually kind of, if you think about it, it's kind of unfair to, it's kind of too generous to the person who's borrowing money, because if I loan too much and I was in too much debt, then I could just declare bankruptcy under a set of conditions and not have to pay my money back. Well, it's basically your fault for giving me that money, for trusting me to return that money, right? So it's kind of unfair. But that's the reason why this is increasing, actually, because more and more business people are actually declaring that they're bankrupt. There are three reasons. Number one is increased benefits. So as you can probably tell based on my description, the bankruptcy law gives a lot of benefits to the person who's in debt, the subject of the debts. Because think about it, you're basically completely relieved of any financial pressure you have from debt. And secondly, it gives you a fresh start. So it allows the person to basically start from you. Let's say, okay, so if I first started my business, right, my total assets was $0. After I managed this business for 10 years, but I messed up somewhere along the lines and I fell into debt, right? If I declared bankruptcy, my total amount of money would still be zero. So it's basically as if I didn't mess up at all and I just started from the beginning. So of course, if you were a businessman a business person who were in debt, right? Then of course you will welcome this fresh start. So now you don't have to pay any debts. And the last reason is because of increasing acceptance. Bankruptcy in the old days, bankruptcy used to be considered something that was really shameful, because if you fell into so much debt that you somehow met the conditions for bankruptcy, right? Because you can't just be owing like a tiny bit of debt. You have to be owing a lot of debt, and they look at whether or not you have the ability to pay that back. So if you somehow manage to get you into that kind of boiling water, then you are definitely messing up somewhere. You definitely made a bad decision. But now bankruptcy has started to be viewed more as a financial tactic, where some people are actually declaring themselves bankrupt on purpose, just to gain a financial advantage. So it's been becoming less stigmatized in the last years, and it's been becoming more and more accepted. Now, we covered many things throughout this course, but it's quite easy to forget when we cover a lot of things. And that's the reason why the last part here is dedicated to a final review of everything that we've done so far. So here's just some of the things that we covered. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list at all. It's just an estimate. So we defined economics. We talked about international economics. We talked about supply and demand, incentives, regulations, and evaluation. And the last section is just entirely review of what we did. So I will just be going through each of the questions, and please feel free to answer if in the chat if you know the answer. So what is opportunity cost? And what are the factors of production? And don't worry if you can't answer this, because this was from our very first lesson, actually. So I've received some good answers so far. Okay, so what is opportunity cost? So opportunity cost is the idea that every single decision is a sacrifice. So there's no, technically from an economics perspective, there's no truly good decision, because with every single decision that you're making, you're giving up on something else. So you're sacrificing something else. There is a cost of you having the opportunity to do something. So you're basically choosing, should I choose A or should I choose B? Which one would give me the most benefits and the less harms? But technically, if you chose A, then you will be losing out on B. If you chose B, then you will be losing out on A. And what are the factors of production? So the factors of production are basically land, labor, capital, and enterprise. So these are basically the factors that every single company needs in order to become a successful company, a successful business. So you have to have land. You obviously need land, because in order to start a business, you have to have somewhere to put your stuff, right? So that would be considered land. You need labor, because if you're a good and functioning business, then you can't be the only person working inside your business, right? So you need to have some employees to work for you. You need capital, because okay, we all deny this, but money does matter. Money is important. So you do need capital to start a business. And lastly, you have to have enterprise. This is a fancy word that basically just means ideas. Enterprise is the same meaning as ideas in this context. So it basically means you need to have the financial idea to start that business. What is your business going to sell, and how should your business operate? What is inflation, and what is specialization? So inflation is when a certain currency is no longer worth its original value because the government printed too much of it. This is a complicated concept that I explained, I think, in our first or second lesson. So it's quite complicated, actually. And you can look back at the video if you don't understand my explanation. So basically, it rotates around the idea that the whole value of money is derived from the fact that it's rare. You can't go out onto the streets and just pick up money like you pick up leaves, right? You can just pick up money like it's paper, right? When money is no longer rare, when money loses that state of it being rare, money is no longer worth money. If you ask yourself, what's the difference between, let's say, a piece of tissue and money, right? The key difference is I can get this piece of tissue much more easily than I can do with money. This is just a piece of paper. I can just get this from anywhere, but I can't get money from anywhere. So one day, if our currency, our USD became paper, basically, you can walk anywhere and basically just get USDs, then USD will not be worth that much anymore. And that will be inflation. The key reason is because the government prints too much money. Specialization is basically this idea that exists within every single country and every single functioning society, where a certain part of the functioning society basically functions to produce a product more than the other parts of the functioning society do. So every single institution is good at producing something with the least resources. What is supply and what is demand? This was covered within our supply and demand lesson. Supply is just how much the manufacturer has available to sell, right? So let's say if I was selling ice cream, because I just love ice cream. That's my favorite example for this, right? Then Supply would be how much ice cream I have sitting on my shelves. So that would be supply. And demand is how much the customers want my ice cream, how much they want my ice cream. This should be relatively self-explanatory and intuitive because supply and demand, the words themselves say what they are. What is the relationship between supply and demand, and what is the point that what is the name of the point that the manufacturer tries to find on the graph? This was also in the same lesson, but I do know that my second question is a tiny bit specific, so don't worry if you can't answer it. So the relation between supply and demand is that as supply goes up, the demand also goes up. Actually, a better way to put it is actually the other way around, because it doesn't seem logical this way. So let's say if I were selling ice cream, right? If every single person wanted my ice cream, if my ice cream was extremely popular, right? Then what would I do? I would increase the amount of ice cream that I were making, right? So I will want my consumers, my customers, my patrons to purchase my ice cream. So if they bought my ice cream, then I will be producing more ice cream too. What is the point that the manufacturer tries to find? The manufacturer tries to find the equilibrium point. So that's just the perfect point in which the costs and the supply are exactly balanced and are the same. And it's basically when it's the best midpoint. That's the best way to put it. Yeah, so this right here is just the graph, because these type of things are kind of hard to remember. On the left here is the price, and on the bottom here is the quantity. So the equilibrium point basically tells you how much supply you should have, how much of the product you should be selling, and at what price to sell the product. So as you can see, it's when the supply and the demand curves intercept. So it's right here. What are the types of incentives? What types of incentives are there? What type of incentive would a parking ticket? A hint, because these questions are kind of open, right? So there are two types of incentives. So the types of incentives are positive and negative. So an incentive is basically anything that's used to convince someone to behave in a certain way. So they're either positive or negative incentives. Positive incentives are basically if you do something, then something good is going to happen to you. But a negative incentive will be if you did something, then something bad would happen to you. So a parking ticket would be a negative incentive because it's saying that if you park illegally, then something's, aka a fine, is going to happen to you. What is capitalism? And is there a capitalist country in the world? If so, please provide an example. Okay, so basically, capitalism is a system of economic regulation where 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 the businessmen can do whatever they want, and the citizens of the country who are doing business can operate freely. So basically, this type of economic system is when you can just proceed in whatever way you want. There's no regulation, whatever. And the second question was actually a trick question. There is no capitalist country in the world, and there is no socialist country in the world, because every country is actually a blend of the two. So it's on a spectrum, right? Are you closer to the capitalist side, or are you closer to the communist side, or the socialist side? What are the types of financial institutions they are, and what would a bank be an example of? So financial institutions are basically any type of, I don't want to use the word company because that's kind of too specific. It's any type of organization that deals with money, basically. And the types of financial institutions there are depository, contractual, and investment institutions. So what are each? Depository, okay. Depository, right? The word depository sounds like deposit. So you're putting some kind of money there, right? You're depositing money there, as the name suggests. Quite self-explanatory. An example would be a bank. So for a bank, you're putting money into the bank, right? You're depositing your money into the bank, and you're hopeful that the bank you chose is a good choice and a wise choice, and is a bank that would actually save your money and not be operating some kind of secret Ponzi scheme, right? The second type are contractual financial institutions. So contractual institutions are basically any type of institution where you have to sign a contract. I know typically because money is important, right? So for any type of money related operations, you would have to sign some type of contract. So even if you deposit it into a bank, you would still have to sign a contract. But contractual financial institutions are limited to organizations where the entire plan is encircled around the contract that you sign. So what exactly does this mean? This is, for example, like an insurance fund and insurance company, right? You are signing a contract with the insurance company that says, okay, I will pay you this amount right now, but if X happens, then you have to pay me a certain amount of money. The whole point of an insurance company is to fulfill that contract that you signed, right? Well, I hope that my insurance never has to be used, because insurances are always for like bad things basically. But I can't predict the future. So I'm hoping that my insurance companies would do their end of the bargain and do what they promised through the contract. So this is a contractual financial institution where the whole idea of this business transaction, of this agreement between us, was reached through a contract that I signed that says that both of us have to do something. The last type of financial institution is an investment institution. So an investment institution is an institution where they take the customer's money and they use that money to invest, because technically we can all invest, right? I can invest, you can invest, he can invest, she can invest, they can invest, right? So we can all invest. But the problem is we don't have a way of knowing how to invest the best. We don't know how to invest in the best companies that would actually make us money and not lose money. And believe it or not, there actually are methods of calculating what companies to invest in. It's really complicated mathematics, right? So I won't get into that, but there are ways to find out what type of companies you should invest in. And there are workers and employees whose entire profession, so their entire job, is to predict and to offer advice in terms of what type of companies their customers should invest in to make the most amount of money and to generate the most revenue. The second question, what type would a bank be an example of? A bank would be an example of a depository institution. So it's an institution where you're depositing money, you're putting money, right? The whole point of a bank is to put money and to store your money there, because you would like your money to be safe, and you would hope that the bank was not operating some kind of a Ponzi scheme, for example, some kind of bad thing going on, right? So you're trying to deposit your money there. You're quite literally putting your money within a bank. What are some policies governments adopt to gain advantages in trade wars? And what agency of the government regulates finance related matters? I think that was enough time, right? But you can keep answering in the chat if you would like to. So let's remind ourselves, what's a trade war? A trade war is when trade gets not so peaceful. It's when trade becomes more competitive. And I know that all the politicians say, oh, fair competition, right? But in trade wars, there really is no fair competition. It's all about who can gain the most advantages. And the way that they gain these advantages is through tariffs and subsidies. So what's a tariff? A tariff is basically a tax on a certain type of foreign product. In simpler terms, they're basically trying to make it harder for foreign firms to enter their country to do business in and to operate. So let's say if I was selling ice cream, right? And I sold to, for example, if I sold my ice cream to Canada and the US and Canada somehow became engaged in an active trade war, right? Then what the Canadian government would do is they would put a high tax on my ice cream, like a really, really high tax. So this tax is going to make it much harder for me to do business in Canada because I would be making much less money. And if this tax were implemented on the scale of the entire economy, imagine the effect of that. A country making it hard for business people of every single industry to do business within their country. This is specifically targeted towards only one specific country. This business people will not be able to enter that country's market and will not be able to operate successfully there. But for some governments, actually just making it harder for foreign firms to do business is not good enough. They also have to support their own domestic firms. And how do they support their own firms? Through subsidies. So subsidies come in all forms, but it's basically this umbrella term that talks about any type of economic policy that was meant to benefit the firms of a certain country, right? Okay, continuing with my story of a trade war. Okay, so let's say if I got chased out of Canada, right? And I could only operate in the US. So now if the United States government implemented a policy of subsidies, right? Then what they would do is either grant me a certain amount of money, basically. It's basically free money. Or they could also give me a certain amount of tax deductions. So if I got taxed to death by the Canadian government, right? Then the American government would decrease the number of taxes that I would have to pay. And the second question was, what agency of the government regulates finance-related matters? So the agency of the government is the Federal Reserve, which is located in Washington, D.C. It's the branch of government that's mainly responsible for basically anything that has to do with the economy. Next questions. I think that was just about enough time, right? Like this is kind of introductory. So it's a tiny bit earlier in the course, so it's fine if and it's also a really small difference. So it's not that obvious at all. So the key difference between a depression and a recession is a depression is basically the long version of a recession. It's basically a recession that goes on for a long time. And the difference between GDP and GDP per capita is GDP per capita is basically divided per person. It's the divided by person version of the GDP. So a lot of economists actually say that GDP is not that accurate because GDP, let's remind ourselves, what exactly is GDP? GDP is how much the country is able to produce and has the capacity to produce. But GDP per capita is how much each person, each working adult is able to produce. Depends on what type of GDP per capita there is and what institution it is doing it. It may include more than just the the working adults. But let's say if the GDP was $1 billion, for example, that only means the whole country was making $1 billion combined. But that does not mean that each person was making $1 billion. So how you get the GDP per capita is basically you divide the GDP by the population of the demographic that you wanted to include within your calculations. And for the GDP per capita, it's sometimes equated with the average income actually. But there actually is a difference because there's some levels of okay, so there is a relationship between the GDP per capita and the income. There is a causation between the two. It's not just a correlation. There is a causation. Don't get me wrong, but the two are not the same because GDP per capita is how much you produce, whereas average income is how much you earn, or not you, but the average citizen within a country earns. But there are some issues like social issues like income inequality that makes it kind of hard to calculate these things. So you just have to remember that there is no such thing as a 100% accurate economic indicator. There's no such thing as some kind of economic measure that's completely accurate because there's so many factors involved. And after all, you're calculating the income of every single person within a country, right? So that in itself just makes it hard. What is unemployment? And I'm praying that none that like every single person here never has to deal with this. But what is unemployment and what is the difference between the HDI and the GDP? And these two right here are abbreviations, HDI and GDP. HDI is the Human Development Index. So I just write human because I know that these are not the most intuitive abbreviations. And this one is gross. Not gross as in disgusting, but gross as in total. Unemployment is basically the state where someone is without a job. And this has to be when they're actively seeking a job. So they're trying to look for a job, but yet they can't find one. So this right here will be unemployment. They're looking for the job, but they can't find a job. And there's actually a really specific range where someone has to be in terms of age to be considered unemployed. It's usually about 18 years of age. So that means that you cannot be unemployed. It's impossible for you to be unemployed. Actually, it's completely impossible because you're below the working age. So you can't be unemployed without a job if you're not supposed to have a full-time paying job. So that means that unemployment only applies to people who are older than 18 years old. And unemployment only applies to people who actually want a job. So let's say if you made a voluntary decision to quit, you simply just did not want your job, then you will not be considered unemployed unless you started looking for a job again. The moment you start looking for a job, you're officially classified as unemployed. And the way that unemployment works is it's actually an economic status. So you may be asking, what exactly should we calculate? What exactly counts as unemployed and what exactly counts as not unemployed, right? Because unemployment actually comes with its benefits and compensations. So if you became unemployed, then you basically receive something that's called the unemployment insurance. It's basically this amount of money that the government gives you once you become unemployed. So to help you recover from not having a job anymore, to help you recover from not being able to generate an income, to help you deal with the pains of unemployment. And obviously, when the government is trying to give you money, they have to make it really clear what type of criteria you have to meet in order to receive their money, just to make sure that you're not taking advantage of the system. What is the difference between the HDI and the GDP? So HDI, I didn't write the whole thing out on the board because it was too long, but the HDI is basically the Human Development Index, and the GDP is basically the gross domestic product. So gross total domestic product, and product here means how much worth, how many products of value in terms of the value are being generated here. The HI and the GDP are actually not the same concept. So just because a country is generating tons of value, it doesn't mean that their civilians are actually living good lives. So the Human Development Index takes into account factors like life expectancy, let's say average lifespan, these factors that show how well the civilians, the citizens of a country are living. So that's the HDI. It tells how developed a country is, as the name would suggest, right? Human Development Index, how much development there is within a country. But GDP is how much the country produces in terms of value. So how much worth, how much value the company is, the country, I'm sorry, is generating as a whole. Okay, so next question. What does a contract need to be legal? What needs to be inside a contract for that contract to be considered legal? And what is intellectual property all about? A contract, in order for a contract to be legal, the contract needs agreement, capacity, form, and consideration. All four, not one less. So firstly, agreement means that both sides of the contract have to be agreeing to the contract. So both sides of the contract need to be consenting to the contract. So that means that you can't have a contract where the two sides don't explicitly say and state that they consent to the terms and they agree to what's being put into the contract. A contract needs to have capacity. So what is capacity? Capacity basically means that both parties need to be able to basically do what the contract says. So if the contract says that one party had to pay, let's say, $200, right? Then it's the court's job to find out if the person actually has the $200 for them to pay, right? So in order for you to be entered into a contract that's legal, you need to be able to take on the terms of the contract, and you need to be able to accept the responsibilities of a contract. You can't sign a contract that you simply can't afford, right? A contract also has to have form. So this means that a contract, yes, a contract needs to use the fancy vocabulary, that basically is very, very, very hard to understand. So it has to have form. It has to be written in the proper procedure, and it has to go by the proper procedure, where it has to be a piece of paper that someone signs, right? Two parties signs, or more parties signs. And lastly, there has to be consideration. So what is consideration? Consideration is basically an object of value that's being exchanged. It's anything that's being exchanged within a contract. So within a contract, right? If you think about it, any contract is guaranteeing some kind of exchange. It's promising some type of exchange to happen. So there has to be an exchange going on. You can't just sign a contract with someone just for fun, right? It has to be serious. And of course, a contract has to be legal. So that means that all the stages and everything included within the contract has to be legal. So you can't say, if I pay you this amount of money, then you have to kill someone for me. This will not be a legal contract, because the part where someone has to kill someone else will not be legal. So this will be an illegitimate contract. And what is intellectual property all about? So I received some good answers about this. So, and the answers were correct. So the intellectual property are the ideas of someone. It's basically any type of idea about someone that could be protected by law. And yes, ideas can be protected by law too, because this is the reason why all the teachers are like, don't plagiarize, because yes, I know it sounds quite boring, and it's sometimes quite frustrating when you're working on essays, but you could actually get into legal trouble if you plagiarize in some cases, especially if you were doing something for profit, for money. So let's say if someone wrote a book, right? Then the idea behind the book, the text of the book, is their property. So if you took that text, you could actually be sued, and you could potentially go to jail, or you would at least have to pay a really, really, really heavy fine. You stole the idea for the book if you plagiarized that book that they wrote. So this is intellectual property promised by law. That's it for our class, because we were just talking about intellectual property, right? I hope that throughout this course, everything within the slides has become your personal intellectual property. So that's the reason why I included this email right here. In case you feel like some ideas have not become your sole intellectual property yet, please feel free to send a message to this email address right here, to ask some questions regarding any contents of the course, to make sure that it is forever and ever your intellectual property. Now that this course ends, I would just like to thank everyone for your continuous support. So I like to say that this course, it's not really, it's a mutual learning experience, because it is a learning experience for me as much as I hope it is for you. So what exactly do I mean by this? I mean that throughout this course, I've learned how to teach a course, and I've gained countless experiences that I wouldn't have otherwise procured without you. And that's the reason why I thank you for your continuous support throughout the course, and for you being here. And furthermore, I will be launching a history related course. I still have not decided the official subject of the course in the future, but please stay tuned for the release of that course. And I'm still working on that course right now. And the One World Anchor team is also working tirelessly to prepare for the launch of that course. And I hope to see all of you there. But in the meanwhile, good luck on your money making pursuits, and hope that you will be able to use everything that you've learned throughout this course to generate revenue. So a lot of money, because after all, isn't that just the point of economics? To make sure that you're managing your money the most appropriately and the most correctly. And if you have 5 seconds to spare, please fill out the feedback form that's to be included within the chat right now. Yes, so that Google Docs forms link, I would greatly appreciate it. Within that form if you could please fill that out, just to know what I can gain from this learning experience, and to make sure that I'm doing the best to make everything in this course your intellectual property. Thank you, everyone.